Hey, Mike Finney here, and I really appreciate all the questions and feedback on yesterday's video. And I think it forced me to think more about what I said, and that's what it's all about. So I appreciate everybody chiming in and asking me some great questions. And actually, I learned a lot more from the feedback than I did from shooting the video. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of touch on a couple things that I noted as opposed to typing this out. Not a great typer. So the alpha, beta, gamma terms completely came from Stephen Nesbitt, Lafayette College in Pennsylvania. He's the mechanical engineering head of the department there. Super smart guy, has been helping the USGA since the mid-90s and has written some of the best papers on golf swing mechanics in academics. So if you haven't had a chance to read his stuff, please do. Read it 3 or 4 or 5 times. Don't give up, because a lot of the stuff is pretty tough to understand at first, but then you get comfortable with the terms and you can really learn a lot about the golf swing. So yeah, alpha is just, again, is in plane, in the functional swing plane motion. The gamma is the twisting along its long axis, and then the beta, I didn't really touch on this much, but Sasho did a great talk at the open forum about hand path and how hand path acts on the center of mass of the club. So as the hands go in, the center of mass of the club wants to swing out, and that will have a closing effect to the target. And that's another thing I want to talk about. I think to keep this discussion simple, which it's not ever going to be, and I'm not that naive, but we're worried about the global z-axis. So there's a pole coming out of the ceiling down to the ground, and there's a camera looking down that pole and watching that club come down. Here's the pole, and the club is coming down, and we're going to measure how much it's closing in relation to that vertical z-axis pole. The other thing is to take a more local frame of reference and put markers on the club and measure how much gamma rotation there is, and that sort of takes a little bit, I'm not sure about this, but it takes the alpha and the beta motions kind of out of the equation if you're just looking at the gamma around the shaft. Now another thing, and somebody, I forget who mentioned it, but the other thing is that this shaft is going into lead and going into droop. Can't make droop happen here, as it swings down to the ball, and that effectively makes the handle axis attached to where the center of mass of the club is, because of those shaft bending modes, and how that will affect the gamma rotation. Another question, and Brian Manzella kind of brought this up in his video, will all of these perfectly add up? I mentioned yesterday in the thread that it's a zero-sum game, that if you add the alpha and the beta closing and the gamma closing, if you add to one, well, you have to take away from another. And I think if we measure all of these closing effects, alpha, beta, gamma, if we measure them all on the same reference frame, that all three would add up to whatever your global closing rate is. So if the club is 135 degrees open at the top and it has to get back to zero, everybody in golf with a somewhat decent looking club face at the top, 135 degrees open to the ball, or to the target, excuse me, they have to cover the same spectrum that everybody else covers, whether they're covering early, whether they're covering late, that's up to them. But they have to go from 135 open to zero. If you measure alpha, beta, gamma along the same reference frame, and I'm not smart enough to do that, but maybe somebody out there is, all three of those closing effects are going to have to add up to 135 to deliver a zero club face. Now, Mike Duffy and I had a conversation last night that he thinks that maybe not the case. That's maybe not the case, but we're going to talk more about that tonight. So it'll be interesting to see what he has to say. And I know Sasho's on board with this. Everybody's going to have to cover the same amount of ground, and you have what I described yesterday. You have 3 ways to close the club. There might be others that I haven't figured out yet, But those three things, if you take away from one, you're going to have to add another. So it's somewhat of a zero-sum game, and depending on what component of the closing you're looking at, somebody might say he's got a high rate of closure, or somebody might say he has a low rate of closure, because if you're looking at the different components, some people have more of one than the other. So again, confusing subject. I'm trying to talk through it. I appreciate you guys listening to me as I kind of work my way through it, and I appreciate all the questions, and hopefully this will clear a couple of the issues up. Thanks a lot.